Subscribe and click the bell icon for the latest updates and notifications from the Indian Express.
Hi, I'm Shruti Garodia. Along with Archana Garodia Gupta, we have written a book called The History of India for Children in 2 volumes. We believe that history can be really fun and it's really relevant, and it's something that parents and children should discuss together. So now, as the general elections are upon us, this huge festival of democracy, we think this is a good opportunity for parents to have some conversations about the history of elections in India. India has the largest elections in the world by far, with 900 million voters. This means that 1 out of every 8 people alive today can participate in this Indian election. The next largest election, which is the US election with 160 million voters, is just 1/6 of the size. So trying to organize an election of this scale takes a crazy amount of planning. Now, when we became free, when India became independent in 1947, our constitution makers had many tough decisions to make. Who should get the vote? Should there be separate electorates for women, for minorities? What age should people start voting at? Our first parliament decided to take a huge gamble and go for universal adult franchise, which meant that every adult above a certain age would get 1 vote. It didn't matter if they were rich, whether they were poor, whether they were male or female, whether they could read or whether they were illiterate. This was a crazy idea at that time. Most Western countries thought that democracy would just not work for India. Some people even said it would have to go through benevolent dictatorship for a while before democracy was able to come to India. There were so many uniquely Indian problems that we had to solve, but we solved all of them. So just remember, back then, only 15% of the country could even read basic things like their own name. Most of them didn't even know what voting was, what elections were. They had no concept that they could actually choose their own rulers. So the Election Commission actually had to have special radio programs, make a special video, and tour the country and teach villagers everywhere that they now had this right to choose their own rulers. But how would they choose them? Because they could not even read the candidate's name on the ballot papers. So because of this, to try and solve this problem where 85% of the country was just not even able to choose their candidates as people in other countries did, is something that is very distinctively Indian today, which is the party symbol. So that's why they came up with party symbols for the Congress and other parties, so that even if you can't read or write, that doesn't take away your ability to choose your ruler. So for the very first elections, officials had to go all around the country signing up people onto the electoral rolls. Now this had a very interesting result. Especially in North India, they found that many women refused to give their own names because they considered it was unseemly. They were always known as Raju ki mama or Hari ki patni. So they refused to give their own names, and as a result, 28 lakh women voluntarily disenfranchised themselves for the very first elections. And it's only in later elections that they were able to persuade women to give their own actual names onto the list. You must have seen, after you cast your vote, that your forefinger and nail is dabbed with violet indelible ink. Now, this ink was actually designed and developed in India. This was to prevent some people who were trying to vote again and again. And it was so successful that the government-owned paint company that actually produces all of this indelible ink for all of India's elections now exports it to 30 other countries for their elections. Countries including Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and even Nigeria. So since the very first elections, Indians have been very enthusiastic about voting. We regularly see 60% turnout, which is considered to be very high in democracies. In fact, in 1952, newspapers wrote about how the tribals of Orissa actually came out of the jungles with their bows and arrows and put them down next to the polling booths just to cast their vote. And they spoke of groups of large Nagas who actually trekked for days and days through their dense forested hills just so that they could come and cast their choice. I want to leave you with 3 quick fun facts about the Indian elections. So the first one is that by Indian law, nobody should have to walk more than 2 kilometers to cast their vote. So this has meant that in every election, there are various booths that are set up in the most remote and random locations. In fact, in the first election, there was one polling booth that was set up in the middle of the jungle, and it was meant to be done for very few people, but the only visitors they got was an elephant and some panthers. So number 2, Indian elections have even made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. Maharani Gayatri Devi in 1962 went into the Guinness Book of World Records for winning the elections with the most landslide number of votes, where she won almost 200,000 votes out of 250,000 that were cast. 102-year-old Sham Saranegi, a retired school teacher from Himachal Pradesh, was actually the very first Indian to cast his vote in independent India. He has voted in every election since then, and he plans to vote in this one as well.